Hello, and welcome back to Com 208 Improv. What I want to do today is just sort of repeat and reinforce some of the elements that we discussed or were in your readings about news values. News values are pretty critical, critical for a variety of reasons to what journalists do, what the media do, news media do, and what reporters do. So I just want to like I said, reinforce, repeat, reiterate some of the information that was in your reading. One of the things I do, again, maybe I should tie this in real quickly to the readings that we did and the discussion that we had about objectivity. Objectivity and news values are closely related. If you're a cynical sort, it's because what the connection is that as a reporter, if somebody says, why did you write this story? Why did you ignore that story? Basically with news values, you can give an explanation. You can provide some sort of objectivity to what you're doing and to your claim and to your rationale for doing one story and not another story. Billions of things happen in a given day, and the news media can't cover them all. And so what news media or news values do is they provide a way for journalists to say, I chose this story because of this reason. It wasn't just because I'm subjective or I'm biased or I'm opinionated. I have a good reason for picking that story. So the connections between objectivity and news values are pretty clear and pretty important. So again, go back, maybe repeat and reflect on these ideas of objectivity. And then there's news values through the online writing lab at Purdue. And then there are a couple of handouts that I have that I will give you in class. This one's a fairly lengthy, I shouldn't say lengthy read, but it's a few pages that ties in the lead, the story, and the medium. And one of the things that, again, to repeat some of our discussion, the medium that you work for will determine sometimes or will affect the news values that you use. Your location will, in some ways, define or affect what news values you use. So all this, and again, there's that idea of news judgment. News judgment, again, is this idea of how do you choose what stories to cover? And then also, how do you play those stories? Do you put them on the front page? Do you put them right on the first page of your website? Or do they go to a back page? Is it simply a link? If you're in broadcasting, is it in the first 5 minutes or is it in the last few seconds? Do you give it a 2 or 3 minute story at the top of the news, or do you just give it a 15-second reader at the end? All that is a matter of news judgment that are based on your use and application of news values. So again, a good reading that ties some of the things together. There is also a list here of news values. And one of the things that you'll see, and if we didn't already talk about this, one of the things that you will see is that the news values are somewhat different, somewhat related, depending on, like if you go to the OWL site, some of their news values I think are a little bit suspect. This one, I'm going to give you my list here, my important, or what I figure are the most important ones. Proximity, impact, conflict, timeliness, the bizarre, prominence, and emotional appeal all tie into the ones that I think are important. Need versus want, I'm not necessarily concerned about. One of the other sites that you go to lists sensationalism as a news values, which I think ties into this need versus want. Basically what people want these days are a lot of, I think anyway, basically they want sensationalism, they want entertainment stories, they want celebrity news, they want the latest dirt. Again, what they need is a slightly different thing, that again, as we talked about with the definition of news. News is information people need to make good decisions about their lives, make good decisions in their day-to-day operation. You know, they need to have good information, know what to buy, what to watch, what to do, who to vote for. And so that need versus want, I think it's, again, it's relevant, but it's not critical. And voyeurism, I'm not real big on either, though you will note that on my list, I think, of what news values I think are important, one of them is visual, that there does, you know, a visual story is somewhat more watchable, obviously, and more important, and sometimes more interesting for people if there are pictures. But again, just to go back through, and again, some of these, almost all of these are reflected on that list that I gave you just now, but with slightly different terminology. Impact is critical, or impact is important. How many people will be affected by the news? So again, if you can show that a story will impact or affect a large group of people, that makes it more newsworthy than a story that only affects a small group of people. Timeliness, again, timeliness is critical to news. Timeliness is stuff that's important now, what's happening now. Some of you may have heard the old adage that there's nothing less interesting than yesterday's news. And again, when we live in a society where, you know, the news cycle is minutes sometimes. You know, something new comes along every minute. It used to be a 24-hour news cycle, and we had daily news and daily newspapers and nightly news. The news cycle was roughly 24 hours. We don't have that anymore with the moment-to-moment internet throwing things at us constantly. So timeliness is still critical. Prominence has to do with who's important, who are people interested in now. Some people are always going to be prominent, the governor, the president, a certain number of celebrities. You know, I put in Kanye because everybody loves Kanye. But again, certain people will always be newsworthy no matter what they do. Proximity, a critical one. How close is the news? How close is it to where you are? So again, if you're in Sioux City and there's a fire in Omaha, it may or may not be relevant. One thing I should point out is most news stories will hit a number of these news values. They won't be just single news values. And again, if Kanye is involved in a fire in Sioux City, that has proximity, and it has prominence, and if it's today, it has all of those things. So, you know, if Kanye gets in a car accident in Sioux City, big news story of the day. Conflict, you know, again, events that reflect clashes between countries, institutions, individuals, political parties are often going to be news when there is conflict. Bizarre should be at the bottom of the list, but again, odd stories often make the news. You know, I could give you, I guess, a couple of examples, but you know, my professors in college used to call these the holy shit stories. You know, any story that makes you say, holy shit, you know, that's a bizarre story, more than likely a bizarre story. Or if you sort of go, hey, Steve, look at this, you know, that's going to be a bizarre story. Currency, what's being talked about now, you know, the big current story of the day is COVID-19. You know, anything that relates around COVID-19 or Black Lives Matter, you know, those are going to be newsworthy. Those are going to be played high because they have currency. And human interests, people just like to read about people. They like to read about other people's and sort of an emotional content. We aren't going to probably deal with that one a lot. That's more of a feature writing angle and feature writing element. When you're writing features, you're often interested in that human interest element. All right, so those are the news values that I think are critical and particularly important. What we can do now, just real briefly, Look at the front page of, I think I can do that without logging out of Zoom. Look at the front page of the New York Times, the New York Times website for today, and just kind of see if we can put together some of those news values. Over here, you've got 60,000 new cases of COVID a day. That's impact. I mean, again, almost all COVID stories have impact because all of us are susceptible. All of us need to be thinking about masks and social distancing. Once you get over here, it starts to, you can check out your state, what's happening in your state, and that would be proximity. By the way, again, all of this is timely. I don't think the New York Times puts too much on their front page. Until you get down here and you start looking at feature stories, they're less timely. But generally on this top half of what would be above the fold in a newspaper is going to be pretty timely stuff. You've got your opinion stuff over here. I'm not going to pay too much attention to that. Analysis: conservative court and Trump's appointees declare independence. As I said, political parties often are, the political arguments that we have are generally fall under that category of conflict. And again, you might notice almost all these stories in the middle section here have something to do with Trump, as do the opinion sections. Again, prominence. Trump is a relevant figure for the day. He needs to be covered. What crazy things he happens to be doing, people, and that might fall under bizarre. When he starts tweeting weird things, that might fall under the category of bizarre. As I said, once you get down here and you start getting into feature stories, then you get the human interest angle. A flood dragged her into a 3/4-mile tunnel and she survived. Human interest. I want to know, how did she do that? Here you've got a coffee chain reveals flaws in the Fed's plan to save Main Street. My guess that would probably again be impact, that when the government starts spending money to try to help small businesses, that's impact. That's my tax money. I want to know about that. All right, so I think, again, as I said, you can look at the front page of the news. I think the only one I haven't really covered, or at least mentioned at this point, is the visual. And again, you've got some video there, you've got some decent graphics there. Again, a visual story, if you have good pictures, I think this one might fall under the this is basically, it looks like an art review. So again, there's going to be some nice pictures with that, and people are going to want to look at that. So as I said, I just wanted to give a little bit of a review of, let's see, stop share. I just wanted to give a little bit of a review to those news values, so that you can tie them in, think about them again, think about them with this idea of objectivity. And then when we start thinking about news stories, or you start thinking about news stories, you can start thinking about what's going to have some value to my audience. What's going to have some value to Morningside students? What are they going to think is an interesting story? So that's it for that section and that little bit of repetition. I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that. Okay. Thank you for your attention.